The lonely escape. Adrian had always been a man who craved peace. After years of chaos and conflict in the galaxy, he needed a place where he could escape, a place where he could finally breathe without the weight of constant battles. He had seen too much, felt too much, and all he wanted now was silence, to forget the enemies he had made and the wounds that still lingered. The idea of a deserted planet had always seemed like the perfect solution, a place where no one could find him, no one could hurt him, and no one could demand anything of him. So, when he stumbled upon an empty, uninhabited planet for sale, it seemed like the answer to his prayers, a barren world, far from the eyes of the galaxy, a perfect escape from the harsh realities he had endured. The planet wasn't much, a small, dusty ball of rock floating in the vast emptiness of space, with no atmosphere, no signs of life, and no past. It was exactly what Adrian wanted. He made the purchase without hesitation, eager to start over. He could build his home, find peace, and leave everything else behind. At first, life on the deserted planet felt like a dream. There was no one to disturb him, no need to watch his back, or worry about enemies lurking around every corner. He spent his days exploring the planet, working on his new home, and enjoying the solitude he had longed for. The days were quiet, and the nights were peaceful, but the peace didn't last for long. As the days passed, Adrian began to notice strange things, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. At night, the wind would howl across the barren landscape, and the ground would tremble with an unsettling rhythm. It wasn't natural, he could tell. There was something out there, something that didn't belong. He brushed it off at first, telling himself that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. He had spent years in war zones, his mind was surely still adjusting to the calm of his new life, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. One evening, as he sat by the fire outside his small shelter, a strange sound reached his ears, faint at first, but growing louder. It was a low growl, almost like an animal's, but it sounded wrong. It had a rhythm, a pattern, like it was something more than just a wild creature. Adrian stood up, heart racing. He scanned the horizon, but the planet was as still as it always had been, just the howling wind and the silence. But then, just as he was about to turn back, he saw movement in the distance, dark figures darting across the rocky hills, too quick, too fluid to be normal. They were close, much closer than they should have been. They moved like predators, stalking through the shadows of the barren landscape, their eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, locked onto him. Adrian froze, his instincts kicking in. He had seen enough danger to recognize it when it was close, and this was dangerous. These weren't ordinary creatures, these were beings that moved with purpose, hunting, searching. They had found him. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. How had they found him? This planet was supposed to be empty, devoid of life, yet here they were, Huntresses, or something like them. The Huntresses were fast, faster than anything Adrian had ever seen. Their movements were graceful, but deadly. Each one seemed to know exactly where he was, as if they had been following him for days, and with each passing moment, the distance between them shrank. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He was alone on a deserted planet, and yet, he was being hunted. The realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't the hunter anymore, he was the prey. Panic set in, but Adrian quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest, the sound of his boots pounding against the cracked earth echoing in his ears. The Huntresses were close now, too close. He could hear their soft, almost inaudible footfalls behind him, and he knew he had to move faster. He darted between rocks, trying to throw them off his trail, but it was no use. They were faster, smarter, and they could track him with ease. Adrian's mind raced, trying to think of a plan, any plan, but there was no time. The planet was vast, but the Huntresses were everywhere. With no way out, he realized his only option was to confront them, but how? He wasn't equipped for this kind of fight. He had spent years fighting in space, against armies and warships, but these Huntresses, these predators, were something entirely different. As the Huntresses closed in, Adrian knew that his peaceful life on this lonely planet was over. He had come here to escape, to be alone, but now, the planet had become a trap, a cage, and he was the prey. The hunt begins. Adrian's heart pounded as the Huntresses drew nearer, their glowing eyes tracking his every move with unnerving precision. He had no idea what kind of creatures they were, but they were unlike anything he had encountered before. They didn't move like animals, they moved like soldiers, calm, calculated, and deadly. With every step he took, he could feel the ground shift beneath him, the planet itself seemed to be working against him, every path he tried to take seemed to lead him back into their waiting arms. His mind raced, calculating his options, but the truth was clear, he was trapped. The only thing left was to make them believe he was worth more alive than dead, to outwit them. His first instinct was to hide, to blend into the rocky terrain, but he quickly realized that wasn't an option. These huntresses weren't simply hunting for food, they were hunting for sport, for pleasure, and they enjoyed the chase. The fear in his heart would only make them more eager. It was a game to them, and Adrian was the prey. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The wind whispered through the broken rocks, carrying with it the scent of the hunt. Adrian knew it was only a matter of time before they closed in. He could hear them now, their soft whispers carried on the wind. "Does he think he can escape?" one of them asked, her voice sharp, like a predator scenting the air. Adrian froze, knowing they could hear his every move. His mind was spinning, thinking of the lessons he had learned throughout his life. He was good at surviving, he had learned to adapt, to turn the odds in his favor, but this was different. These huntresses weren't just after his life, they wanted something deeper, something more than just a kill. They were toying with him, testing him, and with each passing moment, Adrian realized that escaping wasn't the goal anymore. Surviving, outwitting them, that was his only chance. He couldn't outrun them, not with their speed, but he could make them doubt, make them hesitate. He ducked behind a large rock, his breath shallow, his pulse raced. He had to find a way to gain the upper hand. He couldn't just be the prey, he had to be the one in control. The huntresses continued their search, their soft footsteps echoed like a distant drumbeat in Adrian's ears. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as one of them stopped nearby. He held his breath, praying they wouldn't find him. But then, a sharp laugh echoed through the night. "He's hiding," one of them said, her voice filled with amusement. "Does he think we can't smell him?" Adrian's heart dropped. He had been holding his breath, trying to remain still, but now, they knew where he was. Without warning, the huntresses lunged forward, their movements fast and precise. Adrian barely had time to react, but he knew he had no choice. He had to fight, to survive. Adrenaline surged through him as he jumped out from behind the rock, spinning to face his pursuers. His hand reached for the small blaster strapped to his side, but before he could even aim, one of the huntresses was already on him. She was faster than he expected, her reflexes sharp. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Her voice was cold as she spoke. "You're stronger than we thought," she said, "but strength alone won't save you." Adrian struggled, trying to break free, but her grip was ironclad. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she forced him to the ground. "You're the first male to be so bold, to think you could escape us. You must think yourself quite the warrior, don't you?" He gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. He knew this wasn't the end. He could feel the fire burning in his chest, the will to fight, to survive. He couldn't let them win, not this easily. With one final surge of energy, Adrian twisted his body, throwing the huntress off balance. He kicked her away, scrambling to his feet. His mind was already calculating his next move. He knew he couldn't take them all on, but he could make them respect him. He could make them see that he wasn't just prey, he was a challenge. But the moment he stood, another huntress appeared, blocking his path. Her eyes were cold, her expression unreadable. Adrian had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He was surrounded. "Are you ready to die?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pitying. Adrian's eyes narrowed, his muscles tensed. He wasn't ready to die, not yet. He wasn't going down without a fight. But as he stood there, facing the huntresses, he realized something terrifying. He might have escaped the war zones, but he had fallen into a much worse trap. These huntresses didn't care about his past, his history, or his strength. They only cared about one thing, the hunt, and right now, he was the prey. The game of survival. Adrian's mind raced as the huntresses closed in, their movements so synchronized it was as if they were one single entity. Each of them had a look in their eyes, cold, calculating, and unyielding. They weren't after his life in the way he expected. They didn't want to kill him right away, no, they wanted to break him, to test his limits, and push him past the point of no return. He wasn't just a target to them, he was a challenge, something to be conquered, something to be broken down piece by piece, and Adrian knew, deep in his gut, that if he gave up now, if he let fear take over, he would never leave this planet alive. The Huntresses circled around him, closing in slowly, their silent movements were like a shadow falling over him, they were relentless, patient, and efficient, and Adrian knew that every second he wasted would bring him closer to the point where there would be no escape. He stood tall, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the Huntress in front of him. Her smile was cruel, but it didn't faze him. He'd faced worse than this before, he had survived battles against alien fleets, entire armies, but this was different, this wasn't a war, this was a game. But Adrian was no stranger to games, he knew how to play, how to outwit his opponent, he had to use their overconfidence against them. They thought he was just some weak male, an easy target, they had underestimated him, and that was their first mistake. "Do you think you can survive?" the Huntress in front of him asked, her voice like silk, but with a dangerous edge. Adrian didn't answer, instead, he made his move, quick and calculated, he lunged forward, aiming to catch the nearest Huntress off guard, but she was faster, spinning around and catching his wrist with surprising strength. "Not so fast," she said, her grip tightening. Adrian gritted his teeth, he wasn't going to give up, not now, not when he had a chance to show them just how much he could take. He pulled with all his might, using his body's momentum to break free from her hold. He stumbled back, eyes scanning the rocky landscape for an escape route, his mind was a blur of possibilities, each second, each choice, could mean life or death, he had to stay one step ahead. The other Huntresses were closing in, forming a semicircle around him. Adrian's breath quickened as he realized they were cutting off his options, there was nowhere left to run, but maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables on them. In the distance, he spotted something, a small cave hidden in the shadows of a rocky outcrop. It wasn't much, but it might provide a chance to regroup, a place to make his stand. Without hesitation, Adrian bolted toward the cave, but the Huntresses were on him in an instant, their movements were fluid, graceful, as if they had been trained for this, but Adrian's years of survival instincts kicked in, his feet moved quickly, finding purchase in the rough terrain. As he neared the cave, one of the Huntresses lunged, but Adrian dropped to the ground, rolling under her outstretched arms. He could hear her growl in frustration, but he didn't stop, he couldn't afford to. The cave was closer now, just a few more meters, and Adrian dove inside, his heart pounding in his chest. He pressed his back against the cold rock, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced as he scanned the inside of the cave. It wasn't large, but it was enough to give him a few moments of cover. He wasn't safe yet, but at least he had a moment to breathe, a moment to think. The Huntresses stopped at the entrance of the cave, their silhouettes framed by the dim light from outside. "You think you can hide from us?" one of them called, her voice filled with amusement. Adrian didn't respond, he was planning, thinking, analyzing every angle. He knew they wouldn't leave, he could hear them, the sound of their breathing, the soft scrape of their feet as they circled the entrance. They were waiting for him to make a mistake, to show himself. And he couldn't afford to do that, not yet. He needed a plan, something that would give him the upper hand. He had to survive, had to outsmart them. For the first time since he arrived on this planet, Adrian allowed himself to think of escape, not just survival, but a way out. The Huntresses wanted him to fight, to give them a reason to chase him, but what if he didn't play by their rules? What if he made them play his game instead? The idea sparked in his mind, but it was risky. He didn't have much time, but he had to try. He took a deep breath, adjusting his position in the cave. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small device. It wasn't much, but it was his last chance, a small, portable EMP generator. The Huntresses had never encountered anything like it, and for a brief moment, Adrian felt a flicker of hope. He turned on the device, holding it close to his chest, praying it would work. With a soft hum, the device came to life, and Adrian slipped it into the opening of the cave. The Huntresses paused, their attention now on the small device. "What is this?" one of them asked, her voice cautious, but still curious. Adrian didn't wait for an answer, he activated the EMP, sending a wave of energy through the area. For a moment, everything went dark. The tides of fate. The world went black for a brief moment, an eerie silence falling over the cave as the EMP's pulse reverberated through the air. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the possibilities. He had no idea if the EMP would work, or if the Huntresses would recover quickly, but he had no other choice. It was now or never. The first thing he noticed was the stillness. The Huntresses' movements had stopped, their breathing gone quiet, they were confused, disoriented, their senses scrambled by the EMP's interference. Adrian wasted no time. He crept toward the cave's entrance, staying low, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering in from outside. The Huntresses hadn't moved, but the silence around them was unnatural. They had no idea what had just happened, and that was his advantage. He peered around the edge of the cave, eyes flicking to each Huntress, but they didn't see him. They were too distracted, trying to recalibrate. He had an opening, and he wasn't going to waste it. With a quick but controlled motion, Adrian darted out from his hiding spot, sprinting toward a cluster of rocks on the other side of the cave. The Huntresses were still trying to understand what had just happened, their eyes wide, scanning the area in confusion. Adrian's pulse raced as he made his way toward the rocky ledge. He could hear their voices rising now, their frustrations building. "What did he do?" one of them hissed. "He used something," another growled, "something to block us." But Adrian wasn't listening. He was focused, moving with purpose. He climbed the rocks swiftly, his eyes searching for anything that could give him an edge. He had one chance to get ahead, one chance to strike before the Huntresses regained control. As he scaled the ledge, he noticed a small opening in the rock, a narrow gap that led into a deeper part of the planet's caves. The way was dark, tight, and winding, but it was his only option. He could sense the Huntresses recovering, their footsteps drawing closer as they regained their composure. He had to move fast. With no time to second-guess, Adrian squeezed into the gap, crawling through the narrow tunnel as quickly as he could. His muscles burned, but he pushed himself forward, one foot in front of the other. He couldn't stop now. The tunnel twisted and turned, the dark space closing in around him, but Adrian didn't care. He was escaping, finally getting away, and for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that he might make it out alive. But then, a sharp cry echoed from behind. "They're going after him," one of the Huntresses shouted. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He had thought he'd gained the upper hand, but the Huntresses were closer than he thought. He scrambled faster, his mind whirling with the realization that this wasn't going to be an easy escape. He couldn't outrun them through the cave system, not like this, but maybe, just maybe, he could lose them in the labyrinth of tunnels. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, their voices carried through the twisting tunnels, growing closer with every passing second. Adrian could feel the heat of their pursuit. The thrill of the chase was far from over, and if he didn't keep moving, he'd be caught. Just ahead, the tunnel opened up into a wider chamber. The air was cooler, and the walls were damp, but Adrian didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his eyes scanning for any way to get an advantage. The chamber was vast, but empty, nothing but jagged rocks and deep shadows. But in the far corner, something caught his eye, a strange glow, faint but unmistakable. He approached cautiously, curiosity pulling him forward. As he got closer, Adrian's eyes widened. What he had thought was an illusion was real. There, in the corner of the chamber, was a massive crystal, glowing softly with an inner light. The crystal was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, almost liquid in appearance, pulsing with energy. He approached it carefully, his fingers brushing against its surface, and immediately, a wave of energy surged through him, a surge of power, of understanding, hit him like a shockwave. His mind exploded with visions, of far-off galaxies, of planets, of civilizations that had long since vanished. The crystal wasn't just some artifact, it was alive, ancient, a conduit of unimaginable energy, and it seemed to call to him, pulling him toward its core. For a split second, Adrian considered the possibility that this crystal could be his salvation, but before he could take any further steps, the sound of footsteps broke through the chamber. The Huntresses had found him. They were closing in, and now, Adrian was caught between the Huntresses and the mysterious crystal. His escape route was blocked, and there was nowhere to run. One of the Huntresses appeared in the doorway, her eyes burning with cold fury. "You think this will save you?" she asked, her voice laced with venom. Adrian didn't have time to respond. His hand moved instinctively, pressing against the crystal once again. and as he did, the ground shook, the crystal pulsed with energy, and the room around him seemed to warp. The Huntresses gasped, taken aback by the sudden surge of power. But Adrian didn't wait to see what would happen next. He knew that this was his last chance. He braced himself for whatever was to come. The shifting destiny. The moment Adrian's hand pressed into the crystal, the entire chamber seemed to come alive, the ground beneath him trembled, and the air crackled with energy. It was as if the planet itself was awakening, responding to the pulse of the ancient artifact. The Huntresses hesitated, their eyes wide with surprise. For the first time since the chase had begun, they looked unsure. It wasn't fear in their eyes, but something else, something they hadn't expected, a sudden shift in the game they had been playing. Adrian could feel the power from the crystal coursing through him, a strange warmth, like liquid fire, flooding his veins. It was overwhelming, and for a moment, he nearly lost control, his vision blurred, his head spun, but then, a sharp clarity cut through the chaos. He understood. The crystal wasn't just a relic, it was a key to something much greater, something that could change everything. It was an energy source, a wellspring of untapped potential, something the Huntresses never could have anticipated. Adrian had been foolish to think he could escape this alone, but now, he realized, he didn't need to run, not anymore. He could control this, control the energy that flowed through him. The Huntresses took another step forward, but this time, they didn't look confident. They were no longer circling him as predators. Instead, they paused, as if sensing the change. They knew this wasn't a normal fight anymore. One of them, the leader perhaps, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice cold but with a trace of uncertainty. Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes and focused, drawing more of the energy from the crystal, feeling it pulse through him. He could feel the world around him shift, the air vibrating with power. He was no longer the prey in this game, he was the one in control. With a deep breath, he opened his eyes, and in that instant, the cave seemed to explode with energy. A blinding light filled the space, and for a split second, everything went silent. Then, as if in response to Adrian's will, the crystal released a shockwave, sending a wave of force outward, pushing the Huntresses back. They were thrown off their feet, landing hard against the rocky walls. Adrian stood tall, a wave of power flowing through him, his eyes burned with intensity. He had no idea what the crystal had done to him, but he wasn't about to question it now. The Huntresses struggled to get to their feet, but there was something different in the air. The power was on Adrian's side now, and the Huntresses could feel it. "You can't control this," the leader spat, struggling to rise. "You think you can tame what's inside that crystal?" Adrian looked at her, his expression cold. "I don't need to tame it, I just need to survive it." And with that, he took a step forward, his newfound strength guiding his every movement. The Huntresses may have been predators, but they had underestimated the force they were up against. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting for something greater, something that could change the course of his life and the fate of this entire planet. The ground continued to hum beneath his feet, the energy surging. Adrian reached out, his hand glowing with the power of the crystal, and as he did, the cave around him began to respond. Cracks appeared in the walls, the rock itself shifting and reshaping. The Huntresses stared in shock as the environment seemed to bend to Adrian's will. They had never seen anything like this. The planet was becoming part of the energy, responding to the crystal's call, and Adrian was its new master. One of the Huntresses, more cautious than the others, took a step back. "What are you going to do with all this power?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian turned his gaze toward her, his expression calm but filled with an inner fire. "I'm going to make sure you never underestimate me again." With a sudden motion, he directed the energy toward the ceiling, and a massive chunk of rock broke free, falling into the pathway, blocking the Huntresses' exit. They were trapped. For the first time, Adrian allowed himself a small smile. The tables had turned, and now, he was the one in control. He had fought for survival, for freedom, and now, with the power of the crystal flowing through him, he had the upper hand. But as the dust settled, Adrian realized something else. The crystal wasn't just an escape, it was a new beginning. It had changed him, but more than that, it had given him something greater. It had given him the power to reshape his destiny, to control his future. The Huntresses, now desperate, looked at him with a mix of fear and respect. They had come to claim their prize, but now, it seemed they were the ones being hunted. Adrian stood tall, his heart racing, but this time, it wasn't from fear, it was from the sheer exhilaration of what he had just unlocked. He had been alone, desperate for peace, but now, he realized the true power of the planet, and the Huntresses who had come to claim him. The game wasn't over, but it had only just begun.